So yes, it's true, the Ukrainian front collapsed near Popasna. I know it's straightforward and that it might trigger some, but I don't know how else to describe it. Hold on, if I was working for the BBC or The Guardian, I could have sprinkled some euphemisms. Ukrainian forces cede control over Popasna, temporarily retreat, victoriously fight their way into a non-binary, gender-neutral fortress centered on Severodonetsk. But seriously, Russians captured Popasna and now they're fighting their way through towards Bakhmut. They're also in the process of storming Liman, they're tightening the siege of Severodonetsk, and they cleared the Troitsky and Mironivsky sectors. We're talking about roughly 2,000 Ukrainians stuck at Severodonetsk, up to 3,000 around Zolotov, and the main grouping at Lysychansk with 10,000 men. Anyway, I'm warning you, it's gonna be a map-heavy video, so let's step into the headquarters, I guess. Hi and welcome to History Legends. Here are the latest news about the Russo-Ukrainian war. Here we cut the BS and talk about what the media doesn't tell you. As always, information changes by the hour, so if you have any new update, just comment it below. If you're new to this channel, make sure to check out my Ukraine playlist so you don't miss anything I've said in the past. And as you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon, the link is in the description, to keep the show running. What to do with a cauldron? You're a Ukrainian general, and you have to defend this salient, or this cauldron. What do you do? Number 1, you defend all positions at all costs, and you send everything in, all reinforcements, into that salient. Number 2, you make sure to have troops in reserves that can counterattack locally. Number 3, you withdraw to a more suitable position. We talked about it for weeks. The Ukrainian General Staff thinks option 3 is the best. First of all, they asked their troops to withdraw from Severodonetsk and ideally withdraw all their forces towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, so as not to repeat the same situation as in Mariupol, to keep the forces mobile. Because an encircled army is as good as lost. Now, World War II Germans would have picked option 2. Whenever their comrades would get surrounded, whether a company, battalion, regiment, division, army, they would mount a special operation to rescue them. But for now in Ukraine, I haven't seen that. If you're encircled, GG, well played. No one is coming for you. And this is where I get mad. Ton of garrisons are just sacrificed. Anyway, President Zelensky and Ukrainian officials believe that option 1 is the best. He insists on keeping Severodonetsk, and despite the threat of a mass encirclement, the Ukrainian army continues to send additional forces into the Severodonetsk cauldron. From what I read, the last batch of reinforcements consisted of 2 battalions of the territorial defense supported by armored vehicles, about 2,000 men. And they also have reinforcements from Kharkiv that had to abort their counteroffensive to help plug the gaps in Donbass. In a way, I think that all this stems from the fact that many Ukrainian officials believe that they won't be able to regain lost territory, or at least not the one that matters. And in the end, it seems that they want to make every gain as painful as possible for the Russians. However, what's the plan? You can only play ball and wait for the 90-minute mark if you have the advantage, not if the other team is leading. Let's talk about the Russian plans. Let's be honest, most predictions failed for a specific reason. But it's very important for us to understand that the Russians have no plan. Truth is, they seem to be extremely flexible, much more than anticipated. We already talked about it, but like the Soviets did during World War II, they will attack at several places simultaneously and then focus on the offensive that brings the most success. And of course, to cover their bunda, they will call the failed attempts diversions. And in a way, the modern Russian army uses a similar tactic to what the French army did in 1918. Essentially, they attack massively at one place. In turn, this drew German reserves to that location. But since the French had more trucks and were much more mobile, they could move their men and artillery much faster to another sector. And the French, whenever they met heavy resistance, they stopped and they moved to another place, attacked there and then moved to another sector, and so on. The Germans that were still heavily reliant on railways were running around from one sector to another until they just couldn't keep up. For example, a couple weeks back, we all thought that the main Russian offensive would take place along the Donetsk administration line, with a northern and a southern pincer, because this is the most effective way to cut the Donbass cauldron. So we think. And on top of that, it was highly expected. And Ukrainians just massed all their forces on these two positions, especially around Izium, to make a Russian breakthrough impossible. And it worked. But then the Russians shifted to the Battle of the Severodonetsk. The Russians cleared all the area east of Izium, and they moved fast because nobody expected it. And Ukrainians had to shift all the reserves to that area. And when operations sort of slowed down in this area as well, the Russians attacked along the Luhansk administration line, which again drew Ukrainian reserves to another hotspot. Alright guys, let's talk about the important piece of today, the Battle of Popasna. Since the battles of Kiev and Chernihiv, and even now around the Seversky Donetsk, we have seen that forest areas are where Ukrainian forces show the best fighting capabilities. They can dig in and build fortresses, the army of beavers. It's hard for enemy drones to pinpoint Ukrainian resistance nests and coordinate artillery strikes, and overall terrain is not suitable for armored vehicles. However, in the meantime, Russians have evolved into masters of urban warfare, because it's like a set-piece battle for every block, one after the other. Almost mathematical. If we have a look at the situation on May 1st, for almost 2 months, Donetsk militiamen tried to capture the city of Popasna, but they faced a brick wall. They only managed to reach the outskirts of the city. Popasna was part of the Ukrainian Maginot Line. The advance was complicated by the system of fortifications of the armed forces of Ukraine built over the years. The fortified area was an external line of defense, reinforced by bunkers, as well as an extensive network of dugouts in the city itself, connected by trenches. To the south of the city, on the heights, there were trench networks and positions for Ukrainian artillery. Ukrainians needed more men. And from what I think, it is pure speculation, so it's possible that the Ukrainians withdrew some troops from the Popasna sector and redeployed them elsewhere, like Izium or Liman, which weakened the defense of the area. Because think about it, this sector was considered fine, but everything changed once Mariupol was technically captured. Many Russian units, including the Chechens, became battle-hardened in urban warfare. A significant amount of Chechen units were sent to Popasna, but they were not alone. They were supported by troops of the Wagner PMC. Now, Popasna was defended by well-trained troops of the 24th Mechanized Brigade. However, when Wagner troops showed up, and the Chechens, it was claimed that Ukrainians would lose about 150 killed, wounded, or captured per day. In turn, reservists were called back as replacements for these losses, although they were not as well trained. Now you have to understand that Popasna is located on a hilltop, and it turned out that taking control of the settlement proved to be of great strategic importance. If you know the Russo-Japanese War, a bit like Hill 203 during the siege of Port Arthur, the Japanese sacrificed a lot of their men to get hold of that hill. But once it was done, the Russians could no longer hold the harbor and surrendered. Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses on the southern side of the city on May 6th. The next day, on May 7th, the fortification of the armed forces of Ukraine near the southern outskirts were captured, and movement began towards the center of Popasna. It all happened so fast. And like we mentioned before, the Russian mercenary forces from the private military corporation Wagner played an important role. They consist of mostly veterans from the Russian armed forces. Nobody knows really how much were involved in the Battle of Popasna. But what we know is that as of April 2022, there were 8,000 troops in that company in Ukraine. And according to Ukrainian troops, of that 8,000, about 300 to 500 fighters are from Libya or Syria. But what was shocking is that once the Russians captured this position, the Ukrainian front exploded. And it seemed there were no more reserves to plug the gap, since the Ukrainian forces were stuck in their counteroffensive of Kharkiv. In the meantime, we can safely assume that the Russians poured all the reserves into that salient. Now the Russian forces had 3 options. I'll invite you to put back your bicorn, you'll be Napoleon for a second. Option 1 was a direct assault from Popasna towards Bakhmut along the highway. This city is somewhat at the center of the Donbass salient, right in between Ukrainian groupings at Severodonetsk and Kramatorsk, and attacking through the highway is the shortest path. However, it's also the most defended path. Option 2 is to push north and then west to bypass these defenses and cut through in diagonal these two other highways, which would essentially stop the flow of supplies towards Severodonetsk. Option 3 is to push north and drive up until the Seversky Donets River. It's the shortest path to encircle Ukrainian forces at Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. But if you picked option 3, that was the original Russian plan. However, it was prevented by an event that went viral in the media. You've probably seen all the pictures and all the aftermath of that battle. What I think happened is that, emboldened by their quick success, like I predicted in a past video, the Russians planned to set up bridgeheads across the river for future operations. They tried all along the river, but the most important attempt happened near the village of Bilohorivka. However, what you probably didn't know is that the battle took place over 5 days. The first day, Russian forces actually managed to take hold of the village, but Ukrainian forces from Lysychansk quickly counterattacked and pushed the Russians out of the village into a nearby hill. There was a lot of back and forth at the river crossing and at the village. Eventually, a first Russian reinforcement convoy was stopped at a river crossing, but the Russian commander in charge allegedly ordered a second column to pass through exactly where the first column got destroyed, and they got obliterated. Since the beginning of the conflict, Ukrainian artillery proved to be extremely deadly. They spread out their howitzers and missile launchers, used drones for targeting, and controlled the operation using satellite communications, like Elon Musk's Starlink, which can't be jammed by the Russians. They also use guided artillery shells that can essentially destroy Russian vehicles top down with the first shot without having to adjust. Anyway, all this to say that a push northwards became useless when the river crossing failed. So the Russians settled for option 2. They immediately pushed north towards Oleksandropila. And what was surprising is how quickly Ukrainian forces pulled back. Per se, there was no more front line, since the direct road towards Bakhmut was heavily defended and prone to ambushes. Russian forces bypassed this area and moved northwest along the Mokra-Plotva river, and there's no heavy fighting in front of the town of Soledar. Losing Soledar would be bad because it would cut supply lines going to Severodonetsk, and the trucks would essentially have to go off-road, which would slow down the entire process. And it would give a stronghold north of Bakhmut for the Russian forces. But we have to talk about the pizza dough strategy. If you're new to this channel, that's essentially like rolling a pizza dough. You want all sides even. And the same way, the Russians, after pushing through at Popasna, made sure to secure the right and left flanks. And they immediately pushed south toward Troitsky, like we have seen in my trench video. This sector was filled with developed trench networks. However, they were all meant to fend off an attack from the south or the east, not from behind. So these positions were more or less abandoned one by one. This move created a pocket of about 2,000 men around the city of Svetlodarsk. But on the 23rd of May, the Russians went on to capture the important city of Mironivsky, and essentially they burst the bubble. There was no more point in holding Svetlodarsk and this entire cauldron, since it could be turned by the north and encircled. In my original notes I wrote if the Russians capture Svetlodarsk, but by the time I woke up, the Russians captured the city. Just an example as to how fast things can go. And the general staff of the Ukrainian armed forces said that the Svetlodarsk bulge is lost, that their military left the positions as to not be surrounded. The attack on Bakhmut. We can believe that the next Russian objective would be to march north from Svetlodarsk and push towards Bakhmut. As you can see, it's a relatively flat ground with few urban areas, which could facilitate the push of Russian armored columns. And this would be bad because Ukrainians currently only expect a Russian assault from the east, not from the south. And if the Russians push north across these fields, Ukrainians won't be able to hold on to the highway anymore. Even worse, the Russians could even roll west over all the trenches in this sector and kind of free up Horlivka, from where they could push north and support the assault on Bakhmut. From this highway, this one, and this one. And if they take Soledar, from this highway as well. An attack from almost 3 sides. I don't know if the Russians plan to capture Bakhmut immediately, or fix this position, pin them down, and deal with Lysychansk and Severodonetsk first. But apparently the Wagner guys are already preparing the assault on a town called Pilip-Shatine, which means only one thing, to essentially fight their way through to Bakhmut. I personally think that the Russians will attempt to storm the city in a Popasna 2.0 scenario. And according to the latest news, the village of Vidrozhenia has just been captured by the Russians in the past hours. This confirms the theory that the Russians might launch an operation against Bakhmut in the coming days. I also thought that perhaps this could be coordinated with a river crossing at Yampil. However, one, it's highly expected, and two, I don't think it will happen until the Russians secure the area in Liman and reach the Seversky Donetsk, so I wouldn't count on that. If we look at the worst case scenario, if they leave Bakhmut as it is and push north to encircle Lysychansk, Ukrainians will have all the time to turn Bakhmut into a fortress. However, if Bakhmut falls, it not only neutralizes the cauldron in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, but it also opens the gate towards Slavyansk, which then could be part of a joint operation, a push from the south from Bakhmut, a push from the north from Izium, and a push from the east, which is logical considering the current battle for Liman. And again, we have this attack from three sides, which the Russians tend to do more and more. Here the Russians use another Mongol tactic called the Golden Bridge. Instead of encircling the area and have the Ukrainians fight until the end, they attack from three sides and allow an exit. That way the defending force will be more likely to withdraw to what they think to be a safer position. And this enables the capture of important positions at minimal cost in man and time. Now, to follow up with the pizza dough strategy, there's also a great deal of effort to mop up the Zolotov area. It all started when Russian forces, including the Chechens, captured several settlements in front of it. But the situation was not that bad. However, it became critical when Popasna was lost, and now Zolotov is encircled from three sides. And as we speak, apparently DPR forces captured the southern outskirts of Zolotov. And if we zoom in, we can see the trenches I mentioned in a previous video. The position where you have three lines of trenches, DPR forces just captured it. But they have yet to storm the city, which is also positioned on a hill. There's also important battles taking place near Severodonetsk. It all went very fast after the Russians captured Rubizhne. And now they're attacking Severodonetsk from, you guessed it, three areas. Allegedly, the bridges have been destroyed to retreat from Severodonetsk to Lysychansk. So it will be interesting as to how these things go. In conclusion, we could witness a sort of situation like the Battle of Budapest, where the Russians put the effort on capturing the city on one bank of the river and then complete the encirclement from the other side. Historically speaking, the situation is quite similar. So let's keep an eye on everything going on. For now, that's all we can talk about. Let me know what you thought of my analysis in the comment section below. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you like my work and want to support me, make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.